All right, well, guten Tag. Danke schön, and I'm Prosit. That's the extent of my German. It's a pleasure to be here today. I'm the Director of Commercialization at the University of Waterloo. And for those of you not familiar with technology transfer, just high level, it's the sort of support functions that universities offer to facilitate the mobilization of research outcomes to sort of commercial use. And that's usually through licensing or startup company creation. I'm going to outline sort of maybe what represents an unconventional approach to technology transfer. At least I think most people will find it different from what's going on in most other jurisdictions, particularly here in Europe, but in large extent to the US as well. So just, I'm going to start with some quick facts about the University of Waterloo. Firstly, it's Waterloo, Canada. It was pointed out. It's not the place in Belgium where Napoleon had a bad day. We're located in the region of Kitchener-Waterloo, about 100 kilometers west of Toronto. The university itself is kind of a mid-sized university. We're about $230 million research funding, which isn't large. 6 faculties. Don't have a medical school. We're mostly noted for engineering and computer science. Those are sort of our key strengths. And one of the more sort of interesting or differentiating factors about Waterloo is we run the largest cooperative education program in the world. Cooperative education is just basically experiential learning or sort of apprenticeship style learning. At Waterloo, a 4-year degree takes 5 years, and you have 4 work placements interspersed with your schooling, and there's no summer recess. So it's all work at Waterloo, no time for breaks, or parents like it. I don't think the students necessarily do as much, but that's the way it's set up. That program is it's quite interesting. It actually, the students in 2021 generated about $285 million in salaries. So they're paid. These are paid apprenticeship postings, and that'll become important later on in my remarks just to sort of understand what one of our key differentiators is and how that interplays with our commercialization activities. So I'm going to speak just sort of high level to sort of the 3 pillars in which we facilitate intellectual property mobilization and startup creation. I think the first thing to understand is that globally, globally, except for, as far as I can understand, Canada and Sweden, all institutions are mandated by law to own the results of the investment in research. That's a requirement in almost every jurisdiction outside of Canada and I think Sweden. There might be some other exceptions, but those are the 2 I'm aware of. In Canada, it's open to policy, and you can have any kind of IP policy you want. At Waterloo, it's creator-owned. So if you invent something or create something at Waterloo, you own it. Full stop. There's different flavors in Canada of creator-owned, but I think what makes Waterloo unique is that you own it and you don't have to share anything back to the institution. Some other institutions in Canada may have creator-owned, but you have to share back anywhere from 20 to 50% of the returns without the institution even providing any support for that return. We're a pure play. You own it, full stop, go forth. I think that's important because really what that underpins is that we're trying to offer a sort of an incentivization for commercialization to engage. If you have the maximum incentive, you're more likely to engage. If you're a researcher or a graduate student, particularly researchers, though, faculty members, huge draws on their time. You got research activities, you got teaching responsibilities, you got, in many cases, administrative responsibilities. And to be involved with commercialization, it's a body contact sport. You got to be out there, you got to be involved, you got to put the time into it. Researchers, in many cases, just don't have that time. And when they look at the challenges in trying to commercialize their academic thinking, many of them just throw up their hands and say, I'll just publish. This commercialization thing, it's a lot of work and the chances of success are low. And they're not motivated necessarily to engage with the activity. So that's the first point. We want to incentivize people. And also this policy, interestingly enough, and just some of the remarks from the last speaker, over the years, it has tended to draw more entrepreneurial-minded faculty members and students that come to the institution. So culturally, we have sort of a business-friendly campus. We also undertake one of the highest percentages of industrial-sponsored research at the campus. Our researchers are quite happy to interoperate with industry and private sector interests. So there's sort of a bit of a culture and a desire to sort of benefit from the fruits of your research endeavor. So that's the first thing, incentivization. I mentioned the co-op program. Co-op program is important because students go out into the workplace, they get these four experiences, work placements, and in the engineering faculty, they come together in their final year to do a capstone project. And the capstone project we bring together students, 2-3 students. They've had 4 experiences each, so you've got 8 to 12 sort of vantage points to industry exposure. And if you can identify problems, firsthand problems, and you can solve those become business opportunities, or potentially become business opportunities, and they're validated because you've been out in that space. You won't believe what they're doing in the construction industry. They're 30 years behind, and you know, if we can solve this, we can solve that. That's a business opportunity. So it's sort of an insight to the problem. And again, one of the other speakers previously mentioned, you know, starting with the problem first as opposed to the solution. So that's an important feature here, that our students are getting exposed to problems, and if they can see that and find solutions, there's a germ of an opportunity to create a startup or an idea around that. Thirdly, we try to support our campus with programming to support entrepreneurship and commercialization mobilization. We run a large, world's largest free incubator. It's about 45,000 square feet. You don't pay for it. The university pays for that infrastructure. It supports students, graduate students, and faculty members if they're inclined. We also run entrepreneurship education program. We have what we call an MBIT, Master's of Business Entrepreneurship and Technology. It's kind of like an MBA for entrepreneurs. So we offer education opportunities. We offer the Velocity Incubator, which is a practical extracurricular activity. And then my office, Waterloo Commercialization Office, I'm sort of your traditional tech transfer office, so we kind of support the faculty members more so, and the graduate students as well. So there's no excuse at Waterloo not to get involved in commercialization. There's a landing spot for everybody. We try to have an ecosystem that fits whatever needs and support those people in their aspirations to either translate to research or just gain experiences and become entrepreneurs in their careers as they move forward. So that kind of sets the 3 pillars in which we advance our commercialization activity. Because of that, the consequences of that have been we've had some notable metrics or success in this area over the years. Over the last 10 years, we've had over 400 companies created. Those companies have raised about $12.4 billion in follow-on financing over that time. I think it's also sort of worthy to note is that we're one of the top 20 global startup ecosystems in the world. Waterloo itself is a city of about 350,000 people. But if you take the Waterloo to Toronto corridor, which is about 75 to 100 kilometers, which is kind of very similar to Silicon Valley, which is San Jose to sort of San Francisco, is about the same. We're second only to Silicon Valley in the density of startup creation globally, and also second to Silicon Valley in the number of technical workers in that proximity. And that's important because that sort of locus of talent is what startups can draw on to help scale their businesses. So it's a very rich sort of ecosystem. They kind of classify it as the Toronto Waterloo corridor. So I want to just switch gears here. That's backdrop. So I just want to switch gears here to entrepreneurship and how we look at that. I was doing some research before the conference, and there's this annual survey, the Global Guests survey that's done. And increasingly, students are expecting to have or are aspiring to have entrepreneurial career opportunities at some point in their future, whether it's immediately upon graduation or several years down the road. And these numbers are sort of the results of the 58 countries. I would say the number is actually higher in Canada. I think when we have surveys of our students, they're slightly higher than this. And so students are increasingly looking at, where they want to enroll is where they can be supported with these kinds of aspirations. And this becomes competitive. And I've already told you that we have a differentiator about our sort of co-op or workplace integrated learning model, which is very attractive to students because they earn salaries to help pay off their tuition when they graduate, makes them more employable. But we try to also then factor in a support network for entrepreneurship and supporting those ambitions and those career aspirations of those young people along the way. So So I kind of leave that as an open-ended question. How are universities generally aligning their policies or their practices to sort of encourage this kind of behavior, or are they actually deterring this kind of engagement through the policies and structures that they have in place? So I'm just going to leave that as an open question, and I'll speak to what I think maybe is a way that we can maybe better explain how Waterloo is approaching this. So I think maybe the greatest wall to enhanced research commercialization is the universities' belief that there's revenues to be garnished from this activity, that this is a way to supplement our research budgets, to derive extra revenue. And it was interesting in yesterday's closing plenary session, one of your former politicians, I think it was Thomas Settelberg, made some remarks akin to universities being greedy or just sort of getting in the way. And I think in some ways that's true. I think maybe his remarks were a little harsh, but in some respects, I think that is a big barrier, that universities want to control this because they see it as a sort of a revenue source. And realistically, less than 1% of the universities actually generate enough revenue to cover the expenses that are incurred to actually have this kind of function. And I often say you'd be better off, if you were going to take the money invested in tech transfer, you'd be better off to go to the casino. You have better odds. Blackjack is only slightly in favor of the house. So, so there's a lot of investment going into space, but the returns are just not really, meaningful, except for the anecdotal exceptions. If you have a med school, which we don't have, you get a blockbuster drug candidate, yes, you're going to do quite well. I mean, for years, the biggest success in the U.S. from tech transfer from universities was Gatorade, a beverage. So I think there's a certain fallacy about the amount of money that can be made from this kind of activity.
Just because, with an eye on the clock, I'm just wondering whether we can.
Sure.
Yeah, and then I can ask questions.
Yeah, so I think that the thing is, no one's getting rich. Our philosophy is to get out of the way. Just get out of the way, lower the barriers, but get out of the way, but provide support, like the ecosystem support that I've mentioned. And I think what we're trying to do at Waterloo is reframe the returns. The returns are such that, for universities, tech transfer offices, they're a bottleneck. I have the luxury of picking and choosing. It's voluntary. People kind of want to work with us, and they're my clients. And if I don't add value, then I have no customers. So it changes the paradigm. I am working for people whose ownership they're entrusting me to work on. So that's one interesting way to look at this. And also, from the university's perspective, governments are increasingly looking at universities to solve job creation and other sort of investment objectives, et cetera. And what we're looking at is that investment at Waterloo, from a government perspective and research, they figure something's going to happen with it. So we're getting a higher level of research funding. We're getting more research funding than maybe our size would otherwise dictate. 30% overhead on research funding. So there's a lot of return, and licensing fees don't necessarily cover that reality. Lastly, the startups do research back at the institution, and that research, is, in our context, we're getting a lot of research coming back to institutions, so there's a reinvestment of the returns to the university in that sense. And lastly, metrics. Rankings and metrics are important. The more startups, the more KPIs we have, again, our sort of stature goes up, and students want to come to the university, and companies want to invest in research. That is my attempt to explain how we're trying to break down the walls of research commercialization and entrepreneurship.
So, as a business in itself, isn't it? Scott, we've got time for one question. And we have a question at the front, please.
Oh.
Because I wanted the slide. Can you go back? One slide? Oh, okay, whatever, it's fine. No, I just wanted to ask if you can elaborate on how the startups help the university to do more research, how they sponsor the research.
Yeah, so a lot of the startups are coming from deeply disruptive science, engineering, et cetera, and they they locate in our region because they want access to a lot of the expensive infrastructure that we have. They also want access to our co-op students. It's cheap talent. So you're getting skilled, you want a computer science student, fourth-year student, you come in, cheap talent. And then also, they want to be able to hire graduates afterwards. So they tend to root in our community, and they stay there. And then they do research back at the institution as they grow. As they get funded and they get successful and they're accessing our equipment and our students, there's this sort of reinvestment into research. Their DNA is research. They respond from a research activity, so they believe in research. And so they're constantly reinvesting in research back at the institution.
Thank you very much. Scott, that was very interesting, but you left some open questions, and I believe in the next break, you're going to have to speak to Scott and get those answers. Okay, thank you very much.